Welcome back to Lecture 3. Today we're talking about moral skepticism. There are several forms of moral skepticism, one of which is moral relativism. This is a challenge to morality. It's the idea that moral value does not exist. Things like right, wrong, moral, immoral, are only invented by human beings, but that's all we can say. So moral relativism is the concept that morality is relative. But relative to whom, you might ask? According to moral relativism, morality is relative to a specific people, to a specific country, or to a specific civilization. Objectivism says, no, morality is not relative, is objective. If something is right, something is wrong, well, it's right or wrong for all people, everywhere, any time of the day, any period in history. Something is wrong, period. But relativism says, no, that's not true, because it's people, human beings, that come up with right and wrong. There's no right and wrong in the universe, at least we can't see it. The phrase that we can use to explain moral relativism is the motto, who are we to judge? So moral relativism does not say that in morality anything goes. It does not mean that there are no moral rules at all. Moral rules do exist, but they are relative. So, for example, take language. Any language, like the English language, has certain rules. These rules are rules decided by human beings. Whoever invented the English language wrote down the rules, and we follow those rules. But we can't say that there's anything above and beyond language. It's not like language is something that we found when we came here into the world. We found plants, trees, sand, and other things. Those were already there. They're part of the world, of the universe. We find stars in the universe, dark matter, and all sorts of things. But language is something that we invented. It's not part of the universe. It's not a one piece of furniture of the universe. Okay? So moral relativists say morality is like language. There are rules, the rules that we decide, we like. But these rules are not based on anything that transcends human beings, that is independent of human beings. Okay? So morality, according to moral relativism, is relative to a particular society. Who are we to judge? There's an old story about the Galatians and the Indian people and their habit, their custom of eating the dead. And also the ancient Greeks, whose custom was quite different. They didn't eat their dead, they cremated them. They naturally viewed each other's practice as immoral. So moral relativists a moral relativist would conclude that there is no right or wrong. The Galatians just eat their dead. The Greeks cremate them. Who's right? There's no way to know who's right. They're both right. But is it true that no one is right, or they're both right? It seems that people, in the case of the Galatians, for example, and the Greeks, it doesn't seem that their values necessarily changed, are different, but rather their beliefs are different. When you investigate, you learn that the Galatians believe that their dead would continue living through them if ingested, if eaten. On the other hand, the Greeks believed that flesh could be corrupted, and so they cremated their dead because fire liberates the soul. So as you can see, in most cases, people, despite having quite different and sometimes opposite moral views, what seem to be moral views, in reality, when you investigate further, you find out that it is not the moral principle that is different, but rather their moral belief. For example, just as an example, take abortion. It seems that the controversy over abortion is really stems from different beliefs. Some people believe that the fetus is a human being and life starts at conception. Consequently, these people argue that to perform an abortion will be immoral because what you're killing is not just a tissue, but rather a human being with a dignity. On the other hand, those who are in favor of abortion, typically but not always, argue that it's not true. Life does not begin at conception. In fact, a human being is a human being when he or she is born and has a mind, a will, has preferences, and so on. Consequently, these other people argue that abortion is morally permissible. But notice that both pro-choice and pro-life agree that murder, for example, is wrong. What they differ on is the belief that a human being is a human being and when it is a human being. So it doesn't seem that morality is relative according to this. But let me try to explain some of the implications of moral relativism. In other words, in the next few slides, I'm going to show you what are the implications. What is it to say that morality is relative? If morality is relative, what does that mean? Think about slavery. Think about Hitler and the Nazis. If moral relativism is true, think about it very carefully. What does that mean that moral relativism is true? If moral relativism is the notion that morality is relative, there's no right, no wrong, then it follows that to be consistent, you would have to say that there is nothing wrong with the actions of the Nazis. or there is nothing wrong with the actions of the slave owners, because from their point of view, they did something right. So you can only say that from your point of view, it seems wrong what they did. But in reality, there's nothing wrong, because who are you to judge? Why should it be wrong if they think that is right? But the problem is, this seems absurd. We can, of course, judge people. In fact, think about this. Think about this for a moment. When you praise people, when you praise a person, and you say, "You are so good." For example, you go to a concert, you see a drummer or a trumpet player, and then you remark, that trumpet player or that drummer was really, really good. He's a virtuoso of his instrument. Are you not making a judgment? Now, your judgment can be right or wrong. How can it be right or wrong? If the musician is quite good compared to a lot of trumpet players, he's very, very good, you can say, well, my judgment has a basis. I have a reason to say that. Okay? But, well, it could be that your judgment is not right because you think that that trumpet player is good when in reality he's not really good. Okay, compared to professional trumpet players. But the point is this: we make judgments, and there are good reasons to make judgments. So why can't we then, if we can legitimately praise people, which is a form of a judgment, why are we precluded from criticizing people when they do bad things? How can we not say that what Charlie Manson did was wrong? How can we not say that, objectively speaking, what the Nazis did was immoral, was atrocious? How can we not condemn serial killers for what they do? Well, guess what? If moral relativism is true, then you're not allowed to condemn anyone. You will always have to say, oh, well, it's right for them, then it must be right for them. But it's not ultimately right or ultimately wrong. This is one of the implications of moral relativism. Well, think about also those people in society who fought against, for example, segregation or the subjugation of women. Okay? If you are a moral relativist, you cannot praise or condemn these people. In fact, you should condemn these moral reformers because they did something against the status quo. Who are you to judge? Those who try to better the moral principles of a society essentially went against that society. They try to change the rules. But according to moral relativism, the rules of a society are right. And who are you to judge? Also, relativism says that the social group you belong to determines morality, because it's called moral relativism. Moral relativism is, remember, the notion that morality is relative to a particular culture. But ask yourself, to which culture do you belong? What is a culture? Think about the American culture. What exactly is the American culture? There are many, many different cultures within the same culture. There are Muslims Americans, Indian Americans, Chinese Americans, Italian Americans, religious people, Christians, Buddhists. Which one is the group, the actual culture, that dictates the moral rules? This is a very telling criticism of moral relativism. Finally, some people might say that relativism has to be true, has to be valid, because according to moral relativism, we have to tolerate other people. Now, here's the problem. How are we supposed to consider moral tolerance? Are we supposed to say that tolerance is a universal moral principle? Because if it is a universal moral principle, by definition, moral relativism must be false. Why? Because moral relativism says that as a principle, there aren't any universal moral principles. Consequently, tolerance cannot be a moral principle of moral relativism. Now, a very interesting paper that I assigned you by Professor Park Sungbae. He wants to rescue moral relativism and respond to moral relativism. It's a very clever argument. Let's see his arguments one by one. What does Park says about tolerance? Well, he says the principle of tolerance is also relative to a culture. So a tolerant act is moral in reference to a culture which agrees with it, but is immoral in reference to another culture which disagrees with it. Thus, the cultural relativist does not have to require that the principle of tolerance be absolute. That's the response. It seems plausible, right? If you say, but moral relativism advocates tolerance, Park says that's fine because tolerance is also relative, doesn't have to be universal. What about universality? Well, for the cultural relativist, a moral rule is universal not because it is in line with the absolutely right standard that transcends all cultures, but because it is in line with all the cultures in the world. So cultural relativism does not have to preclude the possibility that all cultures in the world jointly endorse some moral rules. Let me unpack this statement. The moral relativism says there are no universal rules, or I should probably say there are no objective rules. Rules that go above and beyond human beings. According to moral relativism, all the rules of morality might be universal, but universal in a relative sense. For example, in this course, there are certain rules, and we have to respect these rules. They are really universal rules because they apply to each and every one of you. However, the rules of this particular course do not apply to other courses because other professors establish their own rules. So while my rules are universal, they're not objective. They don't apply to all colleges all over the world, to all professors. Similarly, morality is the same. So Park argues moral rules can be universal. A lot of people, a lot of cultures in the world can have the same moral rule. But why? Not because there's something that transcends these moral rules, something that grounds these moral rules, but only because it might be an accident, only because, for example, these moral rules might be conducive to good consequences. Now, was Hitler right? Well, according to Park, a cultural relativist, to be consistent, remember, must hold that since moral values and duties are culturally relative, there's no moral difference between Hitler's genocidal actions and the actions performed by, say, a missionary helping African children orphaned by the AIDS epidemic. But according to Park, a cultural relativist would stand his ground, saying that Hitler's acts were moral with respect to the Nazi culture, and Mother Teresa's acts were moral with respect to non-Nazi culture. Okay, so the answer is to the question, was Hitler right? The answer is, according to Park, it depends. What do you mean? Yes, he was right relative to the Nazi culture. Maybe wrong to you, but he was right. And so that's how you accommodate something that can be right and wrong at the same time, because it's wrong for you, but it's right for them. Furthermore, there's something interesting that Park says. If Hitler had been a cultural relativist, he would not have attacked Jews in the first place, because he would have believed that the German culture was not more correct than the Jewish culture. Because remember that according to moral relativism, there's no one culture that is right, that is superior. All cultures are right, and all cultures, according to relative to that particular culture. So no one is superior to the other. Moreover, his atrocious actions conform well to a cultural absolutist possible belief that the German culture was superior to the Jews, to the Jewish culture. It is not clear to me whether it is cultural relativism or absolutism that has more dangerous implication on our daily lives. I can't resist, I have to say something here. It seems to me that Hitler perpetrated his atrocious actions not because he was a moral absolutist, but simply because he was a moral relativist. Because moral relativism says there's no right or wrong, and if you believe that your culture is right in exterminating the Jews, well, why should you think that your culture is not right in doing so? On the other hand, if Hitler had been a moral absolutist, he would have recognized, this is my view, okay, in my view, he would have recognized that killing innocent people is absolutely and objectively wrong. and perhaps he would not have done what he has done. What about moral progress? Moral progress is something that happens as a result of changing the status quo, changing rules. But according to the very moral relativism, you can't do that, because by changing the moral rules of a society, what do? You try to be better, to get better. But better, the idea of better, the notion of better, exists in if you accept that there is bad, better, and best. But if there is no standard by which you can measure certain can measure your morality, then there's no sense in which you can say that something is better than the morality of the past. In any case, Park argues the following. A cultural relativist would admit that we moved toward equality as a result of the abolition of slavery. But he would deny that we moved toward absolutely right standard. We may think that we are now closer to the absolutely right standard because equality is of absolute value. When we think so, however, we are using the present culture as a moral frame of reference, which approves of equality. If we use the past cultures as moral reference, frame of reference, which disapproved equality, we would have an opposite intuition that we are now farther from the absolutely right standard, and hence we made moral progress rather than progress. So according to Park, moral progress is an illusion. It's only based on the fact that our value today are committed to, say, for example, equality. But if we judge relative to past culture, whose values do not embrace equality, then it would not be an improvement in morality to do so. Any act can be moral. Now, another criticism of moral relativism is that, according to moral relativism, anything can be right. Because if Hitler is right relative to Nazi culture, and we are right relative to American culture, everybody's right. Anything could be right. We can say that the moral views of serial killers must be right because they think they're right. And this seems absurd. Here's where Park has to respond. A car is traveling at 50 kilometers per hour with respect to the ground. As long as you invoke a right frame of reference, the car can be said to be traveling at a speed you like. For example, it can be said to be moving at 30 kilometers per hour if you pick as a frame of reference a bicycle traveling at 20 kilometers per hour with respect to the ground in the same direction. Regarding the same car, you can say that it is moving at 50 kilometers per hour or 30 kilometers per hour, etc. You can choose whatever velocity you like. You are right about the velocity of the car, insofar as you appeal to a right frame of reference. The same is true of morality. You are right about the morality of a certain action inasmuch as you invoke culture which commands it. For example, you can say that murder is right, but add that the action is assessed under the criminal culture which praises murder. So So according to Park, it is true, yes, any act can be moral. It depends. It depends on the frame of reference that you use, just like velocity. Which one is right? Is you can say, well, the car is traveling at 50 kilometers per hour. But on the basis of what? Well, on the observation that relative to the ground, you see, you always have to state relative to what. That's exactly the point of relativity, Einstein's relativity. That you can't say that something is traveling at a certain speed just willy-nilly. You always have to add according to what, relative to what. And when you do that, you basically introduce a subjective notion. You're saying the car is going 50 kilometers per hour. No. The car is going 30 kilometers per hour. And you ask, how do you figure? Well, because relative to the bike, the car is traveling 30 kilometers per hour. And you respond, oh, that's absurd. But the other person says to you, what makes you think that your measurement is right? Why should we consider the velocity relative to the ground? Why can't we consider velocity relative to the bicycle? You can say, who does that? But that's not the point. The point is, how can you be sure that you are right and I'm wrong? Your decision to measure the velocity of a car relative to the ground is just arbitrary. Just like my decision to measure it relative to a bike. Now, is relativism a vague concept? According to Park, a cultural relativist could conjure up again the relativity of motion. We can group a tree, a road sign, and a rock together and say that a car is traveling 50 kilometers per hour in relation to that group of objects, okay? The tree, the sign, and the rock. How many objects are required in order for the group to serve as a frame of reference? Well, the answer is obvious. Any number of objects can do. Even million objects can constitute a single frame of reference. The same is true for morality. Any number of people can constitute a culture. Belonging to two different cultures. Well, now he says, suppose, for example, that Mary is an American citizen and a Christian, and that she had an abortion. The American law condones it, but Christianity prohibits it. So a cultural relativist would again ask us to reflect upon the relativity of motion. Suppose that a car is in motion with respect to the ground. In such a situation, the driver is both in motion and at the same time at rest. The driver is in motion with respect to the ground, but he's at rest with respect to the passenger. The same is true of morality. Mary's abortion is moral in relation to American culture, but is immoral in relation to Christian culture. That's how you make sense of belonging to two different cultures. All right, let's move on to the next topic. The next topic is, again, another form of moral skepticism. But in this case, we are going to look at what is known as moral nihilism. And there are different forms of moral nihilism. Believe it or not, it all comes from the philosophy of the Scottish philosopher David Hume, 18th century philosopher. Now, David Hume was an empiricist philosopher. What does that mean, an empiricist philosopher? It means that, according to David Hume, our knowledge comes exclusively from observation. There's nothing that we can know for sure unless we observe it. There's nothing that we can know prior to any kind of experience. Or to be more specific, I should say that according to David Hume, there are things that we can know, but in a very restrictive sense. We can know, for example, that all triangles have 3 sides. Well, let me actually qualify this. First of all, how can we know that all triangles have 3 sides? Well, first of all, we have to learn the English language and know that triangle means something and the word side means something else. Then when we put everything together, we know that triangles have 3 sides. But the point is this, the point of the Scottish philosopher is this. We know that triangles have 3 sides, but not because we have some faculty of the mind that goes above and beyond the natural world. There's nothing divine about this faculty of the mind. You know, it's only, in fact, he calls it relation of ideas. So the trick is that we only relate ideas. First, we acquire ideas. And how do we acquire these ideas? Well, we acquire these ideas from experience. So somebody taught me the word triangle, and then the word sides, and so on. But there's nothing that we can acquire through this special faculty of the mind. It's only a relation of ideas. So we know that triangles have 3 sides only on the basis of the meaning of the words, just on the basis of the relation between one idea and the other. We don't really know anything. We don't discover anything new about the world. On the other hand, there are what he calls matters of fact. Now, matters of fact is another faculty of the mind. And this faculty of the mind is one that discovers things through experience, inductively, if you remember the lecture on logic. What's the problem with that? No problem, Hume says. The only problem is this, that since we discover things, let me put it this way, the things that we discover from the faculty of the mind of relation, known as matters of fact, cannot tell us anything about the world. It's not a way of acquiring knowledge. Let me explain why. Say that you are on a long road, and you can only see far enough. You don't have any devices other than your eyes, your naked eyes. You see the road is black ahead of you. It's black. And as far as you can see, the road is black. Now, this bizarre analogy or image, whatever you want to call it, is precisely the image of humanity. As humanity, we stand on a road and we walk on a road precisely like this very long road. And according to our observation, we determine things. So now, bear with me and follow this analogy. How do we know that the road is black? Well, simply by looking down at the road and we see that it's black. We can also look back at the road and we can see that the road that we already covered behind us is also black. Now, the question is, what can we deduce from our experience? Are we justified in deducing that the road in the future, the road ahead of us, is black? Well, of course, as far as we can see, we can say the road is black. But what about the road after the point, our limit, the point where we can see the road? The road that we cannot see and we have not covered yet, is it black or not? Well, according to Hume, we have the tendency, the psychological tendency in life to make guesses for future events, although we have not observed them yet. For example, if I now contemplate whether I should leave my apartment through the door or through the window, certainly, naturally, I'm going to choose the door. I don't want to get out of the window because I'm going to fall down and hurt myself or kill myself. But how do I make this judgment? Don't you think that this is the same judgment that I used in the example of the black road? I can't see the road. I can only see it up to a certain point. Beyond that point, I don't know if the road is black. So if I say that the road is black, I'm just guessing. Similarly, I cannot say with certainty that if I get out of the window, if I leave my apartment through the window, I'm going to hurt myself. Because I have not observed what's going to happen. I have not yet observed what's going to happen if I leave my apartment through the window. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, but wait a minute. But we do know what happens when you walk out of the window. You hurt yourself or you kill yourself, right? Wrong, says philosopher David Hume. We don't know what's going to happen. We think that we know what's going to happen because, just like the example of the road, we look back and we see the road in the past. And we say the road was black. And the road has been black for several days. I've been walking on this road for 5 days, and it has been black, and it still is black. Therefore, it's going to be black, even beyond the point where I can't see the road. Similarly, Hume would say, we make the same judgment with respect to the window. How do we know with certainty, that if we leave our apartment through the window, we're going to hurt ourselves. We don't. We make a judgment based on past experience. So the moral of the story is that we cannot know with certainty of things that we have not yet observed, because things can change in the future. Gravity can change in the future. The laws of nature can change in the future. And say, for example, in 1 week's time, the laws of nature are going to be different. And so if I leave my apartment through the window, I'm not going to hurt myself. I'm going to actually land on the ground safe and sound. How do we know? We cannot possibly know that. So the point is that the mind does not have a faculty that enables it to penetrate the truths of the universe. And consequently, according to Hume, we are here in the world just like the example of the road. We are just walking on the road. We only see what's behind our eyes. We cannot know the future. The problem is that we live our lives as if we can know the future. Think about all scientific theories. They are based on this principle. There are some observation. We observe that a certain event happens in a certain order and produces a certain effect, right? And what do? We try to extrapolate the way that this event will happen in the future. But we're not logically justified in doing so. That's why scientific theories are known as scientific theories, not scientific facts, because there's always a possibility that in the future, scientific theories, will be changed. In fact, if you study the history of science, you will learn that many scientific theories have been either modified or even completely changed and now are obsolete. This vindicates Hume's philosophy. So, according to Hume, what is human nature? What is a human? We are part of nature. We have feelings. Our feelings fill the blanks. If I walk out the window, what's going to happen? Logically speaking, according to Hume, I don't know. I cannot know. So what makes me not want to walk out of the window, but rather out of the door? It's my feeling. My feeling, for example, of prudence, that says to me, better not, because last time something bad happened. Everything in life that we experience, the way we approach life, is a matter of feelings, of sentiments, as Hume calls them. So, this long introduction, I could speak more about Hume. In fact, it would be helpful to get deeper into this discussion. But let me get to the point. According to David Hume, since we are part of nature, and everything that we do and the way we approach the world is through our feelings, because there is no possible way that we can rationally understand what nature is and how it behaves. We can only judge by past experience. Then what follows is that when we observe nature, all we can say is to react using our feelings, because our reason cannot penetrate nature, cannot tell us anything informative about nature. It is only through our feelings, our sentiments. Now, why is this important to morality? It's important because David Hume thought that when it comes to morality, it's the same story once again. Consider the following quote. "'Tis not contrary to reason to prefer the destruction of the whole world to the scratching of my finger." This is one of those bizarre quotes, but think about the meaning. If our understanding of the world is only based on our feelings, not on reason, then it doesn't seem that it is rational one way or the other. We can't produce an argument to show that we should prefer scratching our fingers or destroying the world over the other. Consider this following quote. "Reason is and ought only to be the slave of the passions, and can never pretend to any other office to serve and obey them." That's exactly what I said before, that the way we approach the world is through the passions, through our feelings, our sentiments. And our reason is a slave of our sentiments, because our reason cannot determine, cannot deduce anything of the way the world works. Now consider this one. He says, "Take any action allowed to be vicious. Willfully murder, for instance. Examine it in all its lights and see if you can find that matter of fact or real existence which you call vice. You never can find it." So essentially what Hume is saying here is, taken as an example, murder, theft, whatever you want, any action that you consider vicious, that you consider immoral. Examine that action and tell me, what is the element, the fact of that action or event that we can call vicious? For example, if you see two people from a distance and they're moving around, you can't immediately see that what they're doing is vicious or virtuous. You have to ask. You have to investigate. They have to give you a story. And you have a story in your mind. And according to that story, then you will say, what you're doing is vicious or is virtuous. So let me continue. So you can never find it till you turn your affection into your own breast and find a sentiment of disapprobation which arises in you towards this action. Here is a matter of fact, but it is the object of feeling, not reason. It lies in yourself, not in the object. So that which you pronounce any action or character to be vicious, you mean nothing but that from the constitution of your own nature, you have a feeling or sentiment of blame from the contemplation of it. So in other words, think about anything: abortion, murder, helping people do their homework, anything you want. You can examine those things, and you can never find the right or the wrong in those things. It is only as a result of your own personal judgment, your own personal feelings, that you can say this is right or that is wrong. So, according to Hume, reason alone cannot be a motive to the will. You see, we human beings have a rational part and an emotive part, a will, if you will. But Hume says reason is the slave of the passions, because we are driven by our feelings. Even if we are rational, we can rationalize things. But think about it, everything that we do, we have to tell a story. And that story comes from our passions. So morals are not derived from reason. They are derived from the experience of people. Morals are generated from moral sentiments, feelings of approval, disapproval, felt by you, by the spectator, who considers a character of a person or a trait or an action. While some virtues and vices are natural, we have some natural virtues, some natural things. Others, including justice, are artificial. The human psychological makeup of man, of human beings, is similar. We're all made the same. That's the basis for being good to others, according to Hume. Since morals will tend to be similar, moralities might be conceived in terms of social utility. So according to Hume, the role of morality is to listen to our feelings, only those feelings that are conducive to some sort of social utility. There are artificial virtues. For example, justice. In nature, there's no justice. It's only a matter of survival. So justice is something that human beings have to create. Fidelity to promises, chastity, modesty, duties to sovereign states. All these are man-made virtues. There are certain virtues, however, that are natural. We find in ourselves virtues like compassion, generosity, gratitude, friendship, fidelity, charity, benevolence, and others. Now, these are moral feelings. There are other moral feelings. There are other moral natural virtues that might be bad. And according to Hume, which one are we going to listen to? Well, it really doesn't matter according to morality. No one is right, no one is wrong. So the only thing that we can hope for in morality is to follow those virtues that are positive, that are conducive to some good. Now, Hume is important because it is important, and it was very influential on emotivism and nihilism in general. Let's talk about the philosopher Alfred Ayer. The paper that I assigned by Ayer is very, very short. It's a couple of pages. And let me read an excerpt from that paper. Ayer says, if I say to someone, you acted wrongly in stealing my money, I am not stating anything more than if I had simply said, you stole that money. In adding that this statement is wrong, I'm not making any further statement about it. I'm simply evincing my moral disapproval about it. It is as if I had said, you stole the money, in a particular tone of horror, or written with the addition of some special exclamation marks. The tone or the exclamation marks adds nothing to the literal meaning of the sentence. It merely serves to show that the expression of it is attended by certain feelings in the speaker. If I now generalize my previous statement and say, stealing money is wrong, I produce a statement which has no factual meaning, that is, expresses no proposition that can be either true or false. So let me explain all this. David Hume proposed a theory that we can say it's a psychological theory. He explained our motivation to do moral things. Ayer, in a similar vein, proposes a theory of meaning of moral statements. And according to his theory, which is known as Emotivism, when we say things about morality, this is wrong, that is right, we're not saying anything that can be true or false. So if it's not true, of neither true nor false, what is it? If I say stealing my money is wrong, if that's not true or false, what is it? According to Ayer, it is just an expression of our emotion. And since it is an expression of my emotion, or your emotion, it's neither right nor wrong, neither true nor false. And this is what morality is. This is the problem of morality, that nothing in morality can be true or false. I don't know if this conclusion follows. I'm skeptical that it follows, but let me explain the theory behind this. According to Ayer, this is very simple. Look, either a statement is analytic, or a statement is synthetic. I hope you remember this from the lecture in logic, what the difference is between analytic and synthetic. But let me refresh your memory. A statement is synthetic when the predicate and the subject express two different things, or two different concepts. For example, if I say, my sister owns a MacBook, right? That statement is a synthetic statement because we have a subject, my sister, and a predicate, owning a MacBook. Now, owning a MacBook is not something that defines my sister. So, if I say to you, owning a MacBook, you're not going to think about my sister. And vice versa, if I say my sister, and I talk to you about my sister, you're not going to think about a MacBook. On the other hand, an analytic proposition is a proposition where the subject and the predicate do have the same meaning. If I say a triangle has three sides, having three sides is exactly the definition of a triangle. Or if I say a bachelor is an unmarried man, the subject bachelor is defined as an individual, male individual, who is not and has never been married. So in other words, this is an analytic proposition. Okay, now that I refreshed your memory, what's the argument? The argument is the following. Moral statements are either synthetic or they are analytic. Clear, right? But they cannot be analytic, okay? Because if they were analytic statements, then the truth would be obvious. It would be true by definition. So take this statement, stealing my wallet is wrong. If this were an analytic proposition, it would be obvious that it would be wrong, because wrong would be a way of describing stealing, and stealing will be a way of describing wrong. But it's not obvious. If I say slavery is immoral or abortion is morally permissible, these are not analytic statements. These are statements that are synthetic because they express, subject and predicate express different concepts, okay? Stealing my wallet and wrongness are two different things. They don't have the same meaning. So, we have established that moral statements are synthetic statements. Big deal. Now what? Well, Ayer is going to tell us if these moral statements are synthetic statements, they're either true or they are false. Okay? Now, a statement, a synthetic statement, can be true if there are certain things in the world that correspond to that statement. My sister owns a MacBook. That statement can be either true or false. How do you know? Well, it depends on whether, in fact, my sister owns a MacBook. And I can tell you that as far as I know, unless she just went to the store and bought one, she does not own a MacBook. So, the statement, my sister owns a MacBook, is false. Why is it false? It is false because there are certain facts, or there are certain facts that lack in the world. They are not the case in the world. Namely, it is not the case that my sister went to the store and ever bought a MacBook. If the statement is true, it's because my sister, in fact, has a MacBook, possesses one. Good. Now, Ayer says, now when I say stealing my wallet is wrong, or slavery is immoral, in order for these statements to be either true or false, there must be something in the world according to which my statements are true or false. But what could possibly be in the world that makes the statement slavery is immoral, right, true or false. It could be a fact that there exists slavery in the world. Now, you remember the problem that we highlighted earlier. We can never know what it is, what something should be on the basis of what it is. So you describe nature and you say, well, there's a tree out there. Okay, that's fine, that's a fact. But the fact itself, the existence of that tree, does not reveal that it is moral or immoral. The fact itself doesn't say anything about morality. So if stealing my wallet or slavery is true, it's got to be based on whether this wrongness really exists. But where is wrongness? Wrongness must be something that really exists in the world. Something that makes stealing my wallet or slavery wrong. But the only thing that makes stealing my wallet wrong or slavery wrong is not a fact that goes above and beyond stealing my wallet or slavery. What I mean is, what makes it wrong? Well, what makes it wrong is that we, human beings, decided that is wrong. Not because of a certain metaphysical fact of the universe, but only because in a society where slavery exists, there is suffering. So you see, we tell ourselves a story. In a society that condones slavery, there is suffering. Suffering is bad, therefore slavery is wrong. But that's just like Hume used to say, it comes from the feelings. It's subjective. It's not objective. Now you can say to me, well, what's the problem? I accept that it is subjective. All fine and good. Problem is this. It might be subjective, but it's neither true or false. It might be true for you, but it's not true in a sense, in an objective sense. It's not true because, but in fact, Ayer wants to say, it's not even true in a subjective sense. It can't be true because there is no property of wrongness in the world. Only if you discover a property of wrongness can you say that something is wrong. Otherwise, you are the one who decides to say that something is true or false, or wrong or right. So the point of emotivism is that when we express moral judgments, we are not saying things that can be true or false. Because in order for these judgments to be true or false, there must be something corresponding in the world that makes them true or false. My sister owns a MacBook. If that is true, it is because there is a MacBook and that MacBook is owned by my sister. Stealing my wallet is wrong cannot be true or false because that would mean that there is something wrong in the universe, wrongness. But wrongness does not exist. It is something that I supply to the sentence. So consequently, if there is nothing that can be that is wrongness in the universe, and consequently my statement is neither true nor false, then what is the statement? Well, the statement is an expression of my feelings, or to put it technically, a non-cognitive expression of my raw feelings. I approve or disapprove, just like Hume explains. We approve or disapprove, we use our feelings, not our reason. Consequently, moral statements are expressions, emotive expressions. It's like saying, ugh, yay. These expressions cannot be true or false. It would be wrong to say that yay is true or false. It's just an expression of my approval or happiness, contentment, or whatever you want to call it. Now, let me end with the error theory. The error theory starts from the same argument of emotivism. Or I should say, it agrees with emotivism. It agrees in the sense that there's nothing that can possibly make a moral statement true or false, because only factual statements can be true or false. A moral statement is not a factual statement. It looks like a factual statement, but it isn't. A moral statement. Now, let me clarify this. I am not saying that it is false, is neither true nor false that you are stealing my wallet. That's a matter of fact. If you steal my wallet, I can say it is true that you're stealing my wallet. The point is not that. The point is whether it is true that it is wrong to steal my wallet. That is not a factual statement. It cannot be a factual statement. It's only a statement of my feelings. Okay? So the error theory says all moral claims are false. They're not expressions of our emotions, like emotivists say. Because emotivists are not careful about their argument. Think about this. If nothing exists in the universe that can be pointed to, nothing that exists that can make a statement, a moral statement, true or false, then all moral statements are false, are all false. Why they're false? Because when we make moral statements, it is not true that we use moral statements to express our non-cognitive feelings, emotions. According to John Mackey, when we say something like, stealing my wallet is wrong, we are saying something, we are trying to say something that is true or false. But the problem is, because moral values like wrong, wrongness, rightness do not exist, it follows that we are making a mistake, an error. And that is the error theory. Now, on the basis of what error theory is supposed to work? Well, typically by two propositions. All moral claims are false, and we have no reason to believe that all moral claims are false. We have reason to believe that all moral claims are false. Now, what are these reasons? Let me try to explain this argument. There are two arguments. The first argument that Mackey proposes to show that there aren't any moral values in the world is precisely the argument of moral relativism. Essentially, when you look at societies, they differ. Their values differ. They never agree on anything. Is abortion right or wrong? We don't know. Some people say it is right. Some people say it is wrong. Now, Mackey says, don't you think that if moral values really existed, everyone will be able to see that something is right or wrong? Or in other words, Mackey says, if moral values really existed in the world, there would be no moral disagreement, after all, because everybody's able to see that a certain something is wrong or right. But there's too much disagreement. Now, you can say to Mackey, look, just because we cannot see it, it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. But Mackey will respond, but that's like saying, just because we don't see that there is a pink elephant, an invisible pink elephant in this room, doesn't mean that there is one. Okay? It doesn't mean that we have to take this seriously. Now, if you say, well, but I'm sorry, you don't see it, but there is one. But Mackey would say, but if there is one, how can we detect it? How can we learn about it? How can we speak intelligently about this elephant? What do we know about this elephant? And, and especially, most importantly, what effect does this elephant exert on us? Because if the elephant, the presence of this elephant in this room has no effect on us, if we can't speak intelligently about this elephant, if we cannot detect it, or see it, or hear it, or taste it, or feel it, then it seems to me that it's tantamount to saying that there is no elephant in the room. And this is the second argument, the argument from queerness. So, according to Mackey, if these moral values, like right and wrong, really existed, they would be very queer indeed. They would be very strange entities. Now, is it a problem? Well, if they are strange, then be it. They are strange. But that's not the point. The point is this. If they are strange, I can accept that they are strange. But the way that we come to know them would certainly be also very strange, because we certainly don't have the capacity, the faculty to learn about these moral values. We would need some extra capacity that we certainly don't have. If we did, we would know about them, but we don't know about them. Therefore, we don't have this capacity. And so, even if they existed, we wouldn't be able to know them. Because, as a matter of fact, there is moral disagreement. If moral disagreement exists, it is because people don't know what is right or wrong. And consequently, even if these moral values exist, we don't know them. So we can easily drop them and not even talk about them, because it's not really useful to talk about them. So, in conclusion, moral relativism says that morality is relative. Moral nihilism divides into moral relativism. I'm sorry, moral emotivism, and the error theory. In both cases, morality is invented by human beings. It's not discovered. This is the end of the lecture. I hope you enjoyed the lecture, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.